During the season, it's difficult to make improvements just because of the sheer amount of practices and games that you're going to have. Now, if you're playing well and dominating on your team, then this probably isn't of much concern to you, even though it could still benefit you. But if you're going through a rough patch of form, or you're just not performing as well as you'd hoped, then studying film during the season could be a key to unlocking your performance. Now, film study is one of the best ways to keep sharp during the season without adding extra load to your body. And there's a reason why collegiate and professional athletes do so much film analysis. Unfortunately, if you haven't played at that level before, then you're probably not entirely sure how to go about studying film. So I'm going to explain some simple ways that you can do this by yourself during the season. But before we get into that, if you're new to the channel, my name's Tolu and welcome to the gang. Over this side of YouTube, I share as much practical and realistic advice as possible to help you become a well-rounded athlete that performs at a high level in-game and beyond, aka an elite smart athlete. So I think first starting point when it comes to film study is, what should you watch? And ideally, I think that anyone who is trying to study film should be watching full recorded games. Reason being, you can rewind it or pause it. So you can always go back and look at something if you want to double check it, or you can pause it to take a note before continuing. Whereas if you're watching a live game, you might not have that luxury depending on like what setup you have to watch live games. You're also able to see what works and what doesn't, and then you can analyze why something works and why something doesn't. So let's say someone tries to do a crossover and they get to the basket, but if you watch the full game, they might have tried that crossover 4 times and the other 3 times it didn't actually work. And you can see why it didn't work in those situations. You're also able to see those other intangible things that players do. So like their general attitude, their composure, hustle, competitiveness, frustration, and different things like that. You can see how they interact with their teammates, with the refs, with their coaches. And these are important things to learn because if you want to play at a high level, you're essentially going to be in their situation at some point. And it's not just those 40 to 48 minutes you're on the court, it's all that time you spend off the court, all those extra different things that you have to do as a professional. If you start implementing them now when you're not a professional, then it's only going to benefit you the further you go along. And a big reason why a lot of people do make it to the professional level as opposed to others is just their mentality is different. They're just built different, for lack of a better phrase. And if you can start to see these things and these little differences and nuances, then you can start to build yourself differently too. And you can also learn from the refs and the commentators, because obviously the refs are the ones that control the game, for lack of a better phrase. So you can see when refs make a decision, why they make a decision, or in what situations they make certain decisions, so that you can start to avoid that in your own games. But then also the commentators are essentially doing a live breakdown whilst they're watching the game, and they have the luxury of the replays too. So you can learn from what they're saying. They'll also give you some historical things into it, and just by watching it and listening to what they say, you're just building up your knowledge base for when you go and play. Now, in terms of the games that you should be watching, I feel like you should be open to watching any league at any level. And the reason being is that you can see what works at different levels as well, and you can compare and contrast. So we've all seen players that maybe dominated in high school, and then maybe they were like kind of dominant in college, but then they did not dominate in the NBA. And you can start to see why. Maybe it was the different defenders, maybe it's just that they had an athletic advantage when they were younger. Whatever the case may be, you can see why certain things work at different levels, and even across different leagues, because different leagues have different rules. The NBA has a unique rule set to college basketball, which has another unique rules, and then you have FIBA international basketball, which has different sets of rules as well. So you can see what works on different stages, depending on where you're based, and you can adjust to the different leagues that you may play in across your playing career too. As a male basketball player, I know a lot of my audience are men, but we can definitely benefit from watching the women's game a lot, because one, they don't get to just mask their skill through being big or athletic. Like, they have to be skilled, and their game is probably more tactical as well. So there's a lot to be learned by watching the women's game as well. Finally, if you're going to study film of other people, you should probably also look at film of yourself, because then you can compare what you do to what a pro does, and then you can see, okay, how big is that gap between myself and a pro player? And then you can start to see what you need to do to close that gap so that you can end up being at that level too. And also just during the season, you want to see the mistakes you're making game to game, because you're probably going to face those same opponents at least one more time. So then you can learn, okay, these are their tendencies on defense, these are their tendencies on offense, I know how to adjust. And if you don't know where to watch full games for free, because I know that not everyone just has NBA League Pass, which has like all of the NBA games on it, then just search on YouTube. The EuroLeague has a whole load of classic games on there. The FIBA basketball channel has games from all over the world, international, Euro Cup, you name it. Like, there are so many that you can go on there and study. Plus they have coaches breakdowns and coaches workshops as well, so you can see what they're planning from a coaching tactical perspective too. So now we've focused on like what you should watch. the next question is, who should you watch? Now, I think we can break this just into two quick sections. So you've got individual players that you can watch. And when it comes to individual players, especially during the season, I want to be focusing on players that play either my position, are a similar size to me, a similar athleticism, or a similar role, or hopefully all of the above. Now, if you're a younger player, unlikely to find that because, you know, you just haven't grown into your body yet. But, you know, you want to be looking at position/role more so, and you want to have like relative athleticism. But you just want to find a player that is similar to you and what you currently do on your team during this season, so that you can essentially model your game after them because they're playing at a pro level, right? And then during the off season, that's when you can choose, you know, maybe your favorite player, the one who does all the flashy stuff, and you can try and implement the stuff from their game into your game because you have more time to actually work on it. And when it comes to analyzing teams, then you want to look at teams that, you know, essentially play the way that your team does because they will be moving in the same way. And then you can look at the players on that team that are in your role. But then you also want to look at the opposing teams that play like the opponents that you face too, so that way you can start to get a feel for what their tendencies are, and you'll start to see it happen in front of you when you're playing your own games. If you want more behind the scenes of how I train myself and other athletes, then follow me on TikTok and Instagram at Elite Smart Athletes, as I'm always posting behind the scenes content on there too, and I'll link it up here and in the description below. So we've asked ourselves, what games should we be watching? Who should we be watching in these games? And now it's like, within the games, what should we be focusing on? Now, the one thing you don't want to be doing if you're trying to study film is just watching the game like a fan, just following where the ball goes and then just reacting to what happens. You kind of want to try and maybe give yourself a bit of a test and anticipate what's going on during the game. And, you know, if you've been on this channel, I have a whole load of basketball IQ tests, which I can also link up here and in the description below. But just watching the game like a fan isn't going to teach you as much as if you kind of hone in on certain details. Now, it's difficult to focus on multiple things at once in a game that's going back and forth with so many different players, different play styles. So I would try and choose one or two things to focus on. So maybe you're looking at footwork and free throws for today, for example. You just want to look at different particular aspects, things that are related to your style of play, and see how people at a higher level do it. After watching all of this footage and studying it, you know, we do want to implement it. So how can we implement what we've watched? Well, the word study is in the phrase film study, right? So we are doing some sort of work here trying to actually learn things. So if you're trying to learn, you need to understand what your learning style is, and it's not one size fits all. Now, there are 4 basic learning styles that most people can kind of fit themselves into, and it might not just be one that you have, it could be a combination of a couple, but the 4 basic ones are visual, which is where when you see the footage, you're going to be able to just take it in straight away, and that's going to be just implemented in your brain. There's auditory, where when you hear something, that's when you take it in. So it might be hearing the commentators talk, for example, again, while you watch 4 games, or you might need to talk over what you're seeing to yourself so that it sinks in. It's kinesthetic, which is where essentially you need some sort of movement to be able to make that stick in your brain. So perhaps when you're watching a game, you need to have a ball in your hand and you'll need to kind of move along with the movements that you're seeing to be able to make it just be ingrained in your memory. And then there's reading/writing, so where you would probably need to take notes on what you're seeing in order for it to sink in. And I'll link a questionnaire below, which is kind of tailored for athletes for you to figure out what your learning style is as well. Now, the beauty of studying film is that you don't actually have to necessarily do anything extra but watch the film in order to learn, because the more frequently you watch film, the more your subconscious is taking in this information and eventually will implement it. Now, you know, if you're a visual learner, for example, that's going to be quicker than someone who's maybe a read and write learner. But either way, you're both getting better just by watching the film in the first place. And that's why I promote film studies so much, you know, not just in season. Off season is good, but especially in season, because you do so much training in the season anyway. You don't want to add extra load to your body. But film study doesn't do anything. You can actually do it whilst you're recovering. So you're essentially not wasting that recovery time. You could technically call it a form of active recovery, but ultimately you do want to be practicing what you're watching. So, you know, it isn't gonna just be enough to just watch it and just do it. You know, ultimately it has to be put into practice. So maybe once a week you want to try and practice just by yourself, just trying something new that you've seen, and then you do it, you know, against defense in practice, and then you can start to implement it in a game and just scale it up like that. Check the description below of this video for a free vertical jump workout that you can find at www.elitesmartathletes.com. And if you like this breakdown, then check out the playlist that's about to come up on screen, which will have a whole load of basketball IQ tests. And you might as well subscribe whilst you're at it too. But until next time, stay blessed.